The wedding hall smelled like fresh lilies and expensive perfume. Soft golden lights hung from the ceiling like captured stars, reflecting off crystal glasses and polished marble floors. Waiters moved quietly between tables, their shoes making almost no sound. Somewhere near the stage, a violin played a gentle melody that floated through the air like a memory. Everyone seemed happy. Or at least, everyone looked like they were supposed to be. Guests leaned close to each other, whispering compliments about the bride's dress. Cameras flashed in short bursts of white light. Laughter rose and fell like small waves across the room. And in the center of it all, under the brightest chandelier, stood my sister. Ada, her white gown shimmered every time she moved. The fabric caught the light like water under the sun. People surrounded her, adjusting her veil, fixing the delicate flowers in her hair, praising how beautiful she looked. "She's glowing," someone said softly. "She deserves it," another voice replied. I watched from my seat near the back of the hall. Not hidden, but not quite included either. The chair beneath me felt slightly colder than the others, or maybe that was just my imagination. My hands rested quietly in my lap, fingers folded together the way my mother used to tell me to sit when guests visited our house. "Sit properly," she would whisper years ago. "Don't draw attention." Funny thing about advice like that, if you follow it long enough, people eventually stop seeing you at all. Across the hall, my mother stood beside Ada, smoothing the edge of her veil with gentle fingers. Her face carried the same proud smile she always wore when people praised my sister. I knew that smile well. It was warm, soft, careful, but it was never meant for me. The violin music swelled for a moment as the photographer called for another picture. Guests gathered closer to the stage, their chairs scraping softly against the marble floor. No one asked if I wanted to join. No one noticed that I stayed seated. And honestly, I preferred it that way, because standing up meant walking into a circle that had never quite opened for me. The chandelier above the stage flickered slightly, casting thin ribbons of light across Ada's face as she laughed. She looked happy, truly happy, and as I watched her, a strange memory surfaced, one from many winters ago, in our small village where the wind slipped through the cracks in our wooden windows. That winter was the first time I realized something important about my family, not through shouting, not through arguments, but through something much quieter. A coat, just a simple coat, and the way my mother decided who deserved the warmer one. The winter I was 8, the cold entered our house before dawn. It slipped through the broken edges of the window frame and settled into everything. Our thin blankets, the floorboards, the metal plates stacked near the sink. Even the water in the basin felt sharp against the skin like it had teeth. That morning, my mother returned from the market, carrying one paper bag in her hand. Just one. Ada ran to her first. She always did. There was excitement in the house that day, the kind that made the air feel lighter for everyone except me. My mother placed the bag carefully on the table and pulled out a new coat. It was deep blue, thick, soft at the collar, with shiny buttons that caught the weak morning light. Ada touched it with both hands like it was something sacred. My mother smiled. "Try it on," she said. Her voice was full of pride. Not loud pride, not boastful pride, just that quiet warmth mothers carry when they are pleased with what they have chosen for a child they consider worth choosing for. Ada slipped into the coat, and my mother stepped closer to fix the collar. She brushed lint from the shoulders that wasn't even there. She turned her slightly toward the light, checking the fit with the seriousness of someone protecting something precious. "It's perfect," she said. I stood near the doorway, watching, not jealous, not yet. At that age, I still believed there was another bag, another coat, another moment waiting its turn. But there was no second bag. My mother looked at me then, almost as if she had just remembered I was in the room. "You still have last year's coat," she said. I looked toward the nail on the wall where it hung. Brown, faded, one sleeve slightly shorter where the stitching had come loose. The lining had thinned so much that cold slid through it, as if the fabric were only pretending to help. "It still fits," she added. That was a phrase she used often with me. It still works. It still holds. It still fits. As if survival and care were the same thing. I nodded because children learn quickly when an answer has already been decided. Later that evening, while Ada admired herself in the cracked mirror, I put on my old coat to fetch water from the courtyard. The wind cut through the worn fabric instantly. By the time I came back inside, my fingers were stiff and the tips of my ears burned. My mother barely looked up from the stove. "Close the door," she said. Years later, people would say my family loved us both. And maybe in their own way, they believed that was true. But love is often easiest to measure in small things. In who gets replaced, in who gets repaired, in who is protected from the cold, and who is expected to endure it quietly. That winter was not the cruelest season of my childhood. It was only the first season that taught me the pattern. And once you see a pattern in your own home, you begin to notice it everywhere. The applause inside the wedding hall sounded distant, not quiet, just distant, like thunder rolling somewhere far across the sky. Guests stood from their tables as the ceremony ended, their chairs scraping softly against the polished floor. Glasses clinked. Cameras flashed again. Someone near the stage began cheering loudly as Ada and her new husband turned toward the crowd. The room swelled with celebration, and suddenly it felt too full, too bright, too loud for someone like me. So I stood up quietly and slipped out of the hall. The moment the doors closed behind me, the music softened into a dull echo. The hallway outside felt colder, the air heavy with the smell of polish and air conditioning. The golden warmth of the wedding disappeared, replaced by plain white walls and long rows of ceiling lights that hummed faintly above. It was strange how quickly joy could fade once you stepped outside its center. Staff members moved quickly down the corridor, carrying trays of empty glasses and folded tablecloths. None of them paid much attention to me. To them, I probably looked like just another guest wandering away from the celebration, which, in a way, I was. At the far end of the hallway, a long rectangular table had been set against the wall. It didn't belong to the wedding. No flowers, no decorations, no name cards. Just a neat row of plain chairs placed side by side, like spare thoughts no one needed. I walked toward it slowly, my heels tapping lightly against the marble floor. Each step echoed, louder than it should have, as if the building itself was reminding me that this space had never been meant for people like me. I chose a seat near the end of the table and sat down carefully, smoothing my dress beneath me. The fabric was simple compared to glittering gowns inside the hall. No crystals, no embroidery, just clean lines, practical. My mother's word again. Through the wide glass partition beside the hallway, I could still see the stage inside the wedding hall. Ada stood under the chandelier, surrounded by smiling guests and flashing cameras. Someone fixed the edge of her veil again. Another guest adjusted the train of her dress, like it was something delicate that needed constant care. People leaned toward her, protecting the moment, protecting her. I wondered briefly what it felt like to live inside that kind of attention, to have people rush forward the moment something on you looked slightly out of place. Behind me, the hallway door opened. Footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate. I didn't turn around immediately, but I already knew who it was. There are some footsteps you recognize even after years. Ada stopped beside the table. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked down at me and smiled. Not the warm smile she gave the guests inside. A different one, sharper, almost curious. "Well," she said softly, "I was wondering where you disappeared to." Ada pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly. The soft music from the hall slipped through the glass behind her, turning the hallway into something strange. Half celebration, half silence. The golden lights inside the hall shimmered across her white gown, making the fabric glow even here in the colder space. Up close, she looked exactly the way everyone inside had described her. Perfect, not a single hair out of place. The delicate earrings caught the light every time she tilted her head. Even the faint scent of her perfume felt expensive, floral, careful. For a moment she simply watched me, like someone studying a familiar object they hadn't looked at closely in years. "You left your seat," she said. Her voice was calm, almost amused. "I thought maybe you finally decided to go home." I kept my hands folded in my lap. I just needed some air. Ada's eyes moved slowly over my dress. It wasn't the kind of look strangers give. It was more precise than that. A quiet inventory. "This is what you chose to wear?" she asked softly. I didn't answer. She leaned back slightly in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. The movement made the long white fabric shift across the floor like water. "You know," she continued, "people kept asking where you were sitting. That surprised me, not because they cared, but because they had noticed it all." "And what did you tell them?" I asked. Ada smiled again. "That you preferred staying out of the spotlight." She said it like a compliment, like she was doing me a favor. I looked past her through the glass wall. Inside the hall, guests continued celebrating. Waiters carried fresh trays of drinks. The photographer raised his camera again. Life moving forward, as if nothing important had ever happened between the two of us. Ada followed my gaze toward the stage. "You should have joined the family photos," she said lightly. I let out a small breath. "You didn't ask me to." For the first time, her smile thinned slightly. "Oh," she replied. "I assumed you understood." "Understood what?" Her eyes returned to mine. "That today is about happiness." The word sounded harmless, but something in her tone carried the weight of old habits. "You've always had a way," she added quietly, "of making things uncomfortable." The sentence hung between us. Not shouted, not cruel, just carefully placed. The same way she had always done it. Since childhood, I felt the old instinct rise inside me again, the one that told me to nod, to apologize, to shrink the moment until it passed. But tonight something felt different. Maybe it was the quiet hallway. Maybe it was the years of silence finally catching up with me. Or maybe it was a small envelope resting inside my purse. Ada tilted her head slightly. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I didn't answer right away, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't deciding how to keep the peace. I was deciding whether the truth should finally be seen. Ada waited. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table, the diamond on her hand catching the hallway lights each time she moved. Behind her, the music inside the hall swelled again. Laughter, applause, glasses touching in celebration. It sounded like another world, a world that had always belonged to her. "Why are you staring at me like that?" she asked again, this time a little slower. I looked down at my hands. For years, I had practiced silence the way other people practice conversation. Silence kept things calm. Silence avoided arguments. Silence made my mother's shoulders relax instead of stiffen. But silence also buried things. Deep, so deep that sometimes you forget they're even there. Until one day, "You don't." "I was just thinking," I said quietly. "About what?" I lifted my eyes again. "About patterns." Ada raised an eyebrow. "Patterns?" "Yes." The word hung between us for a moment, strange and simple at the same time. "You know how some things repeat?" I continued slowly. "So often that people start believing they're normal." Ada gave a small laugh. "You're speaking like a philosopher tonight. Maybe I'm just tired." "Tired of what?" That question was almost genuine. Almost. I glanced again toward the glass wall, where the wedding continued in bright, golden motion. Guests crowded around the stage. My mother stood near the front, smiling proudly as someone complimented the bride again. The same smile, the same pride, the same careful warmth. "I used to think I imagined it," I said softly. "Imagine what?" "The difference." Ada didn't move, not even slightly. And for the first time that evening, the air between us felt heavier. "You always had an interesting imagination," she replied after a moment. I nodded slowly. "Yes." She relaxed again, clearly expecting conversation to drift away, like it always had before. But my hand moved to my purse. I didn't open it. Not yet. I only touched the edge of the envelope inside. Thin, light, but somehow heavier than anything I had carried in years. Ada noticed the movement. Her eyes sharpened slightly. "What's that?" she asked. "Nothing important," I said. That answer should have satisfied her. But it didn't. Her gaze stayed fixed on my purse now. "Is that why you came tonight?" she asked quietly. "To give me something?" I shook my head. "No." "Then what is it?" I leaned back slightly in my chair. For a long time, I said carefully, I thought today would never come. Ada's smile faded just a little. What day? I looked at her ring, then at her dress, then at the glass wall behind her, where the wedding celebration continued. The day when everything finally looks perfect. Ada studied my face, and for the first time that evening, her confidence flickered, just slightly, because she suddenly realized something. I hadn't come to the wedding to celebrate. I had come to watch, and maybe to remember. Ada didn't like uncertainty. I had known that since we were children. She preferred rooms where she understood every angle, every conversation, every person watching her. Even small surprises irritated her, not because they were dangerous, but because they were unpredictable. And right now I could see it in her eyes. That small irritation. What exactly are you trying to say? She asked. Her voice was still calm, but the softness from earlier had disappeared. Nothing complicated. I replied. Ada leaned forward slightly. Then say it clearly. For a moment, I considered it. But the truth about families is this. The real damage never happens in one moment. It builds slowly, quietly, layer by layer, until one day the whole structure begins to crack. And if you want someone to understand that, you have to start at the beginning. Do you remember the scholarship exam? I asked. Ada frowned. What scholarship? The regional one, I said. The exam in the city when we were both 16. Her eyes moved slightly to the side as she searched her memory. That was years ago. Yes. And you didn't go. Ada shrugged lightly. I wasn't interested. That's not what happened. She looked back at me sharply. What do you mean? I watched her carefully. Because the truth has a strange way of changing a person's posture before it changes their words. You were interested, I said. You studied for it. She scoffed. Everyone studied for it. It was a stupid exam. No, I replied gently. It wasn't stupid. That exam had been everything to me. A full scholarship to a university far away from our village. Tuition, housing, books. An entire future waiting on a single test. For months, I had studied every night by the dim yellow light above our kitchen table. Ada had studied too, but something happened the morning of the exam. Something small. Something easy to miss if you weren't the one it happened to. I woke up early that day. I continued quietly. You remember that? Ada crossed her arms. You're bringing up ancient history. Yes. Why? Because that morning, I said slowly, my exam admission letter disappeared. The hallway suddenly felt quieter. Even the distant music from the wedding hall seemed to pause. Ada didn't laugh this time. You probably lost it, she said. That's what Mother said too. And I believed her. For a long time, I believed it, that I had misplaced the most important document of my life, that my carelessness had cost me everything. I searched the entire house. I continued, every drawer, every book, every corner. Ada's fingers tightened slightly against her arm. And then, she asked, I held her gaze. And then, 3 days later, I found it. Her eyes narrowed. Where? I leaned forward just enough for my voice to drop slightly. Inside your school bag. For the first time since she sat down, Ada had no immediate answer. Ada blinked once. Just once. But it was enough. People think lies reveal themselves through panic, through shouting or denial. But the truth is quieter than that. A lie often shows itself in the smallest hesitation, the pause between hearing something and knowing how to respond. That's ridiculous, she said finally. Her tone was light again, almost bored. You're blaming me for something that happened 10 years ago. I didn't react, because that response was exactly what I expected. I didn't blame you, I said calmly. You just did. No. Ada leaned forward, her voice sharpening. You're saying I stole your exam letter. I said I found it in your bag. That doesn't mean anything. The hallway lights reflected off the diamond ring on her finger as she lifted her hand dismissively. You probably dropped it near my things. Someone moved it. Maybe Mother. She didn't. Ada stopped. How do you know? Because that day had burned itself into my memory so clearly that every detail still lived inside it. I remember the sound of the zipper, The smell of the old leather bag, the folded paper sitting between her notebooks like it had always belonged there. I know, I said quietly, because when I found it, the envelope was already opened. Ada's eyes flickered again, just for a second, but I saw it. You're imagining things, she replied. Am I? Yes. She leaned back again, tried to regain control of the moment, even if that letter was in my bag. It doesn't prove anything. Maybe I picked it up by mistake. That's possible. Exactly. Ada smiled again, relieved to find an explanation, but I continued. Except there was something else inside the envelope. Her smile paused. A note, I said. What note? A small one, folded in half. Ada stared at me now. And what did this mysterious note say? She asked. I watched her carefully, because the next part had taken me years to understand. It said, I replied softly, if you leave before sunrise, you'll make it to the bus station on time. Ada didn't move. And underneath that sentence, I continued, someone had written the departure time of the first bus to the city. Her expression slowly hardened. You're making this up. No, that doesn't even make sense. It did later. How? I reached into my purse. This time, I actually opened it. Ada's eyes dropped instantly toward the movement. Inside, the thin envelope waited exactly where it had always been, yellowed slightly with age, edges soft from time. I placed it gently on the table between us. Ada looked at it, then at me. You kept it? She asked quietly. Yes. Why? I held her gaze. Because sometimes, I said, the truth doesn't matter the day you discover it. Her fingers twitched slightly against the table. Sometimes it waits. I pushed the envelope slightly closer to her. And today, I finished softly. Felt like the right day. Ada stared at the envelope. For a long moment, she didn't touch it. The hallway lights reflected softly off its worn surface. The paper's slightly yellow now, the edges bent from years of being folded and unfolded. It looked small on the wide table between us. Small, but dangerous. You're being dramatic, Ada said finally. Her voice tried to sound amused, but something underneath it had tightened. It's an old piece of paper. Yes. And you carried it all these years? Yes. That's obsessive. Maybe it was. But pain has a strange way of preserving things, especially when no one else remembers them. Ada let out a quiet breath and pushed the envelope back toward me with one finger. I don't have time for this, she said. My guests are waiting. Inside the hall, the music changed to something brighter. Applause rose again as the master of ceremonies announced the start of the reception speeches. Ada stood up. The long white train of her dress slid softly across the marble floor. You should try to enjoy the evening, she added. I remained seated. I am. She paused slightly at that answer. Then she shook her head and turned toward the hall doors. For a moment, I thought she would leave without another word. But halfway to the door, she stopped. Slowly, she turned back. Her eyes moved from me to the envelope still resting on the table, then back to me again. You're wrong about one thing, she said quietly. What? You think today is the day the truth comes out. I waited. Ada's lips curved into a small, confident smile. But today, she said, is my wedding day. Then she pushed open the doors and stepped back into the golden light of the hall. The music swallowed her immediately. The hallway became silent again. I looked down at the envelope. For a moment, I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because Ada had always believed one thing very strongly, that control belonged to the person standing in the brightest room. She never understood something important. Control doesn't come from the spotlight. It comes from timing. I picked up the envelope and slipped it back into my purse. Then I stood up. Through the glass partition, I could see the stage again. Ada and her husband stood beside the microphone now, smiling as the guests gathered closer. The speeches were about to begin, and in a wedding full of carefully planned words, people rarely expect the ones that weren't invited. I walked slowly toward the hall doors. Not rushed, not angry, just steady, because the moment had finally arrived. The moment I had imagined many times over the years. The moment when silence would no longer be the safest choice. My hand reached for the door. Inside, someone tapped the microphone. The room quieted, and just before I stepped back into the light, I heard the host say something that made me pause. "Before we begin the speeches," he announced cheerfully, "we have a surprise message from someone very special to the bride." I stopped because that message wasn't supposed to happen yet. The host's voice carried easily through the hall. "Before we begin the speeches," he repeated, smiling toward the crowd, "we have a surprise message from someone very special to the bride." Guests turned toward the stage with curiosity. A ripple of excitement passed through the room. People love surprises at weddings. They leaned forward, expecting laughter, maybe a touching childhood memory, something warm and sentimental. Ada stood beside the microphone. Her smile remained perfect, but I noticed something small. Her shoulders had stiffened slightly. She hadn't planned this either. The host glanced toward the large screen behind the stage where wedding photos had been playing all evening. "Our team received a short video message earlier today." He continued. "The sender asked that it be shown before the speeches." Ada leaned slightly toward the host. "What message?" she whispered. But the microphone picked up just enough of the question for people in the front rows to hear. The host looked confused. "You didn't know?" he asked quietly. Ada's smile froze. "No." The technician near the screen lifted a hand. "Video ready," he called. The lights in the hall dimmed slightly. Conversations faded. Every guest turned toward the screen. I remained near the back of the room, just inside the doorway now, watching the moment unfold like a slow-moving tide. The screen flickered once. Then the video began. At first, it showed nothing unusual. A simple image appeared. Our old village house. Small, faded, the wooden door slightly crooked the way it had always been. A murmur passed through the guests. Ada's eyes narrowed. The camera in the video slowly moved closer to the house. And then a voice began speaking. Not mine. Not Ada's. Our mother's. The room fell completely silent. Her voice sounded older than I remembered. Softer. Fragile in a way it had never been during our childhood. "If you are watching this," she said slowly, "then Ada's wedding day has finally come." A few guests exchanged confused glances. On stage, Ada stood perfectly still. "In my life," our mother continued, "I made many mistakes as a parent." Ada's hand tightened slightly around the microphone stand. "I believed that protecting one child meant being harder on the other. I told myself that strong children didn't need as much care." The room grew heavier with every sentence. Some guests shifted in their seats now. Ada shook her head slightly toward the technician near the screen, but the video continued. "I want to say something today," our mother said quietly, something that made my heart beat a little faster, because I had never heard this part before. "Years ago, before the scholarship exam," she continued, "I found a letter hidden inside Ada's school bag." A faint gasp rose from somewhere in the audience. On stage, Ada whispered sharply, "Turn it off." But the technician hesitated, because the guests were already listening, and our mother's voice continued gently through the speakers. "It was your sister's exam admission letter." The silence in the room became so deep it almost felt physical. And inside that envelope, our mother said slowly, "I also found a note." The screen behind the stage glowed softly in the dimmed hall. No music, no movement, only our mother's voice filling the space between hundreds of silent guests. "And inside that envelope," she repeated slowly, "I also found a note." Ada's hand gripped the microphone stand so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. "Turn it off," she said again, louder this time. But the technician didn't move, because by now the entire room was listening. When I saw the letter in Ada's bag, our mother continued on the screen, "I didn't say anything." A murmur passed quietly through the audience. "Not because I didn't understand what happened," she added. Ada shook her head. "No, no, no." But the words kept coming. "I understood it immediately," our mother said. Her voice carried a weight I had never heard in it before. Amina had studied for months for that scholarship. She had dreamed about it every night. And Ada, she knew that if her sister left the village, she might build a life that didn't belong under the shadow of our family anymore. Ada stepped back from a microphone. Guests in the front rows watched her now instead of the screen. Some faces were confused. Others were beginning to understand. I should have told the truth then, our mother admitted in the video. But I didn't. The confession hung in the air like a crack spreading through glass. I told Amina that she must have lost a letter herself. Across the room, I could see people slowly turning their heads toward me near the back doors. Because I believed Ada needed more protection, our mother said quietly. A soft gasp escaped someone near the front table. And I told myself that strong daughters can survive disappointment. On stage, Ada's breathing had become uneven. "Stop it," she shouted. But the video continued. Years later, our mother said gently, "I realized something painful." Her eyes in the video looked tired, older, full of regret that it had taken too long to arrive. The child I tried so hard to protect learned that truth could be hidden if it served her. Ada's former fiancé, standing beside her until now, slowly stepped away. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The room had already changed. And the child I allowed to suffer, our mother finished softly, learn how to survive without asking anyone for permission. The screen faded to black. For a moment, no one moved. No applause. No music. Just the quiet sound of people breathing. Then someone whispered near the front tables, "Is that the sister?" Another voice answered softly, "Yes." Hundreds of eyes turned toward me now, not invisible anymore. Ada stood on the stage in the center of the room, her perfect wedding day, her perfect image, cracking under the weight of something she never thought would surface. She looked across the hall, directly at me. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "You did this." I didn't answer, because the truth had already done the work. For a moment, the wedding hall forgot how to breathe. The chandelier light still glowed above the stage. The violinists near the corner stood frozen with their instruments lowered. Even the waiters had stopped moving between tables. The silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, the kind of silence that arrives when a carefully built story suddenly collapses. Ada remained standing at the center of the stage, her white dress glowing under the lights. Just minutes ago, she had looked like the picture of perfection. Now she looked smaller, not physically, but something about the way she held herself had changed. Her shoulders were no longer straight. Her smile had disappeared completely. "You planned this," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she stared across the hall at me. Every guest turned their heads again, waiting for my response. But I didn't move. I simply stood near the entrance doors where I had been all along, because this moment was never about revenge. It was about something quieter than that. Truth doesn't need a performance. Ada looked toward the large screen behind her, as if hoping it would suddenly turn back on and erase what everyone had heard. But it stayed black, empty. Her fiancé, who had stepped away earlier, ran a hand slowly through his hair. His expression had changed from confusion to something deeper. Disappointment. Not the loud, angry kind. The quiet kind that settles slowly when someone realizes they never truly knew the person standing beside them. "You knew about this?" he asked Ada softly. She turned toward him quickly. "It's not what it sounds like," she said. But the sentence came too late, because the room had already heard the truth from the one voice that mattered most. Our mother. A few relatives in the front rows began whispering among themselves. Some looked shocked. Others looked strangely unsurprised, as if small pieces of the story had always existed, but no one had ever dared connect them. Ada's eyes returned to me again. "You wanted to ruin my wedding," she said bitterly. For the first time that evening, I walked forward, not quickly, not dramatically, just a few calm steps across the polished floor until I stood where everyone could see me clearly. "No," I said quietly. The microphone on the stage picked up my voice, even though I wasn't speaking into it. "I came to watch." Ada laughed sharply. "To watch what?" I met her gaze. To see if the truth would ever decide to show up. The room remained silent, because deep down, everyone understood something now. This wasn't an argument between sisters. This was the slow arrival of something that had been delayed for years. Ada's fiancé looked at her one last time. Then he stepped down from the stage. Not angrily, not dramatically, just leaving. The movement sent a quiet ripple through the guests. Ada stood alone under the chandelier, for the first time in her life, and suddenly the wedding that had been planned for months no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like the end of the story, but not mine. The wedding hall slowly began to move again, not with celebration, but with the quiet, uncertain motion of people who no longer knew where they were supposed to look. Some guests lowered their eyes toward their tables. Others whispered behind careful hands. A few stood up and quietly walked toward the exits, unsure whether staying would make them part of something uncomfortable. The golden lights above the stage still shimmered, but the warmth they once carried had faded, because everyone understood now. The perfect moment had broken. Ada remained standing under the chandelier. Her white dress still looked beautiful, but beauty, I realized, can feel very fragile when the story behind it changes. She didn't chase after her fiancé when he left the stage. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, staring at the empty screen behind her. Maybe she was remembering something. Maybe she was realizing something. Or maybe she was seeing the past the way I had lived it for years. One quiet piece at a time. I didn't stay long after that. There was nothing left to say. The truth had already taken its place in the room. And once truth arrives, it doesn't need anyone to explain it. I walked slowly toward the hall doors again. The same doors where I had entered earlier that evening. Still invisible, still carrying the old envelope inside my purse. But something had changed. Not the room, not the people, just the weight inside my chest. It felt lighter, not because someone else had fallen, but because I no longer had to carry the silence alone. Outside, the night air was cool. The city lights stretched across the street, like small constellations scattered on the ground. Cars passed quietly. Somewhere far away, music from another celebration drifted faintly through the dark, life continuing, the way it always does. I thought again about that winter long ago. The coats, the scholarship letter, all the small moments when I had learned the difference between being loved loudly and being expected to endure quietly. For a long time, I believed silence was strength. Tonight, I learned something else. Sometimes strength is simply letting the truth stand where everyone can see it. No shouting, no revenge, just light. And as I walked away from the hall, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. Justice doesn't always arrive with anger. Sometimes it arrives with calm footsteps and an old envelope that finally decides to be opened. But I often wonder something. If you had been in my place, sitting quietly through years of being overlooked, watching the world celebrate someone who once stole your future, would you have stayed silent, or would you have waited for the perfect moment, the way I did?